Paris Perspective.
Well, look, Paul, this is the year that it was. First, on a personal level, this must have hit you hard. I mean, your stand-up shows were sold out, but then everything was put on hold. Now, just looking at the kind of political aspect of this, the French government pumped over €7 billion into the arts and culture sector to help it survive this storm. Now, when you see what's happening in arts elsewhere, be it in Europe or around the world, would you be happy to say, thanks to fuck, I'm in France?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any of that 7 billion.
Well, that's a start, though. Yeah.
It's good publicity. No, I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, in general, I've always been really cognizant of the fact that if I wasn't based in France, let alone COVID. My job would be a lot harder, and it would be, being a comedian or being a stand-up comedian in English-speaking countries is, it's a real struggle. Like, you spend years and years and years in comedy clubs, basically performing in front of 5 people. It's not going well, open mic nights, and then, maybe 5-10 years later, something comes of it, but there isn't any. The journey is a difficult one in France. Also, because I found my niche very quickly and I found my voice, I was able to very quickly earn a living from it. And I feel very fortunate of that. And that's 100% because of the French system. Because if I was in England or in the US, it would have been a lot harder to kind of... There's a lot more people out doing comedy in our countries, in English-speaking countries.
So the competition is fierce as well, but there's no intermittent de spectacle statues or whatever.
Exactly, yeah, here they've got the whole intermittence, which is, essentially it's just, it's a way of saying, hey, you work intermittently on different projects, and when you're not working, the unemployment benefits will come to you. I mean, obviously it's not automatic. You have to work a certain amount of hours in a year to benefit from the times when you're not working. So yeah, the French system is better. It's very protective of employees in that space, as it is for tenants and landlords, as it is for it's more protective to the people who don't have the power than it is to the people who do have the power. So that's kind of cool.
And with lockdown and the year indeed that it was 2020, which has been hard for all of us, I can say. What part of the lockdown, apart from the loss of the live shows, was the hardest for you? Was it the lack of restaurants, the closing of bars, personal contact being restricted? I mean, no one's able to travel. I mean, we all wanted to go home. I mean, it's coming up to,
It's a good question. I've never thought about what's the worst part, because the shows got cancelled. I'd say the hardest part. I mean, I'm a new dad, so our baby's now 18 months old, and she started working. She started walking when. Just at the end of the first lockdown, so we kind of got a decent break in the sense that for the first lockdown, because if the first lockdown was 4 months later, it would have been really difficult to have her at home all the day and try and stop everything that's going on. So we lost to childcare. So I'd say that's probably the hardest thing was the parenting 24 hours a day, because there was no childcare and we didn't have work, so we stayed at home.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we all also with my son, we had to do the homeschooling, which was an absolute head wrecker. I mean, it was just very difficult, and it's just very difficult to keep the kids motivated as well. But I mean, anyhow, let's just hope as time goes by that this will all be a thing of the past. But
I feel like it's been 6 months that we've been saying that, and it just keeps dragging on,
and then it keeps dragging on. Exactly. And I mean, it's just very hard to kind of make plans in your head because you just don't know what's on the horizon. You never know. But let's go back also to he being here in France. I mean, the culture minister, Roselyne Bachelot, said she was heartbroken following the announcement that by Jean Castex, the French Prime Minister, that theatres, cinemas, museums were going to be locked down for a further 3 weeks, and they will remain shut. Now, also online, there is this hashtag pas essentiel, pas essentiel, which basically means not essential, as in you, as a part of the art scene or the culture scene, you're not essential. Now, what do you reckon? Are you essential?
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I agree. I have to be honest.
The theatres have opened?
No. I'm. Here's the thing. I'm very controversial. Not controversial, but I'm like, we aren't essential. What is essential is a supermarket because you need to eat, or ophthalmologist because you need to get your glasses sorted out, or hairdressers. They're essential. Yeah. Going to a place to laugh isn't essential because you can consume my. I mean, I'm specifically talking about my work. I've switched to a more online presence during.
most people exactly.
Yeah,
in
there's
the
certain
arts
things
world,
that can't be like a theatre. You know, like if you're going to watch a theatre play, that's very difficult to consume outside of the theatre. But it's such a small part of the population that go to theatres anyway. That I agree. We're not essential. Like you can't say that going to a theatre or a cinema is essential. Going to a bar and a restaurant is more essential because it's food and drink that you have to have. Yeah, you can do that at home, of course. But yeah, so I was less. I'm at the point where I've kind of given. I'm just like, all right, cool. The theatres are shut.
Exactly.
Even though I've got a tour coming up next year. I'm hoping that it doesn't get cancelled, of course. But if it has to, then it has to. You know.
Indeed. Well, I mean, you just have to roll with the punches. I mean, this is the other thing. I mean, we discussed that we've come this far. There's no point in screwing it up at the last minute by burning your masks and going right to hell
And I'm
with
sure
this.
you walk into any hospital and you say to them, "Oh, do you think theatres are essential?" They'll be like, "Absolutely not."
Smack in the face.
Yeah, exactly. So one part of me wants to complain because that's my nature. I'm always complaining.
Is that the French half now that's rubbing off on you?
Yeah, well, it's the British half, but the French half. It's kind of the mixture of both. But I know that I'm in a privileged situation. You know, I don't work in a hospital. I'm not a nurse that's dealing with 25 COVID patients every day, and that for me is. Those are the people that are struggling the most, you know, and it's difficult for me to go behind this hashtag or whatever, like pas essentiel, where I'm complaining about not being able to work. It's like, Jesus, give us a break. Do you know what I mean?
So, I mean, when the cloud passes, I mean, your shows up to date were sold out. What is on the cards for 2021, if everything, of course, is opened up again?
If the world hasn't burnt down, then the tour that I interrupted in March last year, it got interrupted, is starting again in January, end of January. So end of January until the end of April is the final part of my stand-up tour.
So British ou presque.
So British ou presque, which is my second hour-long show. And the idea that the last show is in Paris in a big room, which we're filming at the Grand Rex. So the idea is to film that on April 23rd and then have it available wherever it'll be available, whoever's interested in having me.
And I'm sure it'll be a great success. I mean,
we'll see.
It's a great venue. I mean, it's
the Grand Rex, I love it.
Yeah.
I think and on video it looks great. What I'm hoping is the dates leading up to that don't get cancelled because I don't want to film it in April and then still have to do the gigs that were postponed, because it's you know, when you film it, you know that's what everyone's going to see, and there's a couple of hundred people that are going to see a different version, but and then sometimes it gets better. The more and more you perform it, obviously you find a new joke, you find a new thing, and that's the mistake I made with my first show. The filming of it happened 9 months before the final show.
Gotcha.
So I was still touring, and by the end of it I was like, I wish I'd filmed it now, because there's new jokes, there's new things to talk about. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so that's kind of the first half of the year, and then I'm not booking anything for the rest of in case everything gets pushed more and more and more. Yeah. So,
fingers crossed indeed. Like, back to touching on something that you were mentioning there about, you know, the online platforms and the use thereof. When the lockdown ends, the vaccines are rolled out and the world reboots. I mean, how do you think, or how do you see the use of social media and streamcasting, for example, evolving in the arts world? I mean, artists have been performing live online throughout the pandemic, also just to feed their own boredom, just to kind of go to avoid their own boredom, to you know, having Zoom events and using StreamYards and things like that. And everybody's been on a huge kind of social media learning curve. But when the theatres do open for live acts again, will there still be an appetite, do you think, for the online element that you've seen over the last 8 months?
Oh, for the online element, I think so. Yeah, because I think there's there's a group of people who are willing to go out to a theatre and watch a show, but there's also people who've never done that.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of people that come to my show and it's their first ever like live comedy show.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. So a lot of those people are still going to stay at home. The people that would never go out to a theatre anyway because they don't have the money
to look at it online.
Yeah, or because the person that you like is touring in places that you don't live. You know, if you live in a small village somewhere and you don't have the resources to go to the bigger city for the tour, you're still going to be staying at home anyway. So for me, it adds more audience.
Indeed, that gives a very Paris perspective. I mean, when you're in France, everybody thinks when you're in Paris, you think Paris is France. No, France is France. Paris is only that nut that it's still. In your head,
everyone in Paris is like, people are coming back out to the theatres. No one's going to be doing online stuff. It's like, have you forgotten that there's still like 65 other million people that live in France that are not in Paris?
This is the whole thing. It's a city that consumes you. Indeed. Now, again, 2020, it's been a sucker punch of a year for the arts and culture scene, but also some inspiration for new material in a world turned on its head. Now, you came up with the I Swear little series of video podcasts while in lockdown. Let's have a look at one of these nuggets of I Swear.
Oh, fuck me, France. It's day 5 of the lockdown, but for every day that we have to stay at home, I'm going to teach you a new English insult. That way you can slag off the French government and they'll have no idea. Today's insult is the word cockwomble. What? Yeah, you heard me. Cockwomble. Now, I'd never heard of this insult. Maybe because I've spent too much time outside of the UK, or I'm just an old man, or both. But you asked for it in the comments, so here it is, cockwomble! As in, Olivier Véran, you're a cockwomble. Now, there is no French equivalent to this because you guys didn't have the children's TV show called The Wombles. But you did have a children's TV show called Teletubbies, so the French equivalent could be, Olivier Véran, you're a Teletubby. Tub, beat, Teletubby, it basically means that you're an idiot. Now, it's time for you lot to insult me in the comments below, and I might use your words in the next video. See you tomorrow, dickheads.
And I'm sure that comments box is full. I mean, you can really see idle hands making the devil's work. And to really get a French explanation of the word cockwomble is pretty chapeau.
If somebody could, if somebody comes up with a real version of it. But I mean, it's the idea came when they announced the lockdown. I was like, I've got to figure out something. People were asking me to do, because I did a live YouTube like Q&A basically every day of the first lockdown, and I carried it on because I wasn't on stage for a couple of months, so I think it's 70 episodes of that, and people are like, oh, you're going to do the live thing again? And I was like, it was too much, like an hour every day of doing that.
Exhausted, indeed.
I had nothing else to do, granted, so it was okay, but it took a toll on my wife and the baby. It was just, so I was like, let me find something that I can do every day. And I don't know, I think I went online and I just saw people, insulting the French government, being like, putain, on est en confinement, merde. And like insult, I was like, maybe there's something with English swear words that I can teach.
Help them.
Yeah, like that was the
help the lexicon.
Yeah,
of abuse.
Exactly. That was the because French people, the only swear word that they ever use when they speak English is fuck. That's the only one that they know. Yeah. And they use it all wrong as well. They use it in wrong situations.
Well, now that you brought that up, this was something I was going to ask a little later, but you are mentioning that. I mean, do you think that French people actually understand the vigor of the use of the word fuck when they employ it in public? I mean, post-lockdown, like this is a place around the corner from me, there's a shop that's open called The Fucking Mask.
Really?
And it's about, it's about, they make their mask and they're going, because it's directly translated as le putain de masque.
Yeah.
And I mean, if this is just in Canal Saint-Martin, and you'd probably be fined, or at least you get pestered by some busybody if that was a shop front in the UK or Ireland.
You get arrested.
You could be shot in the US, God knows what. Yeah. But I mean, do you think that the subtleties of are lost on the French?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they like everyone really who doesn't speak a language natively, they hear or watch music or TV shows or films, and they hear the use of these swear words, and then they just go, I can just take this and use it in
I remember being in a Franc Prix and there was a song going on that "Fuck You Very Much." I mean, it was
the Lily Allen song.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is like, it was like 12 midday with babies and mothers going around the place, and I'm like, Jesus, if that was in Tesco or Sainsbury's.
It's not more, and this is part of the reason why the first mini series that I did on TV, What the Fuck France. Yeah. I found it hilarious that on a Saturday at lunchtime, just after the news, they would play a thing called What the Fuck France, and it was called What the Fuck France, and it's not bleeped out. The title is on the screen, like it is just. It goes to show you what. And what's interesting about that is that I find that in the UK and English-speaking countries, we're more prude about how we use swear words on TV and radio. There's more censorship around that than there is in France. However, I find in real life, we're a lot more casual with swearing than the French are. I find that as soon as you drop a couple of swear words in a French conversation with people, that there's like an extra set, like with your in-laws, you could never swear. It's just like this weird. Whereas in Ireland, you know, my mum, it doesn't like it just. It's part of our
DNA, I suppose.
It's part of our DNA and spoken language, and we don't get offended by it in real life. But on TV, as soon as someone says shit before 9 p.m., we're like, "Oh, I've got to write to somebody."
Yeah, exactly.
It's weird. It's a weird.
Well, I suppose it's the way the English language has evolved. It's just a kind of a bastard language that has pulled from all of these elements from around the world. So the kind of the liberal use of all of these colourful phrases is actually is quite quite normal and commonplace. But I mean, between the two countries, who curses better? Who swears better, the French or the British?
I think the English.
Yeah,
the British. Well, I'd say the further north you go, I'd say the Irish and the Scottish are much better swearers, and the further south you go in Australia, to the extreme.
And
I
the
think
accent is all important, of course.
The
you know
accent
what I mean?
gives a lot, and I find that we're more creative with our swear words, like the cockwomble.
Exactly.
Like that's a you know, a phrase that, I mean, 10 years ago didn't exist in the UK, but I don't know where it's come from. But I find that we're more creative in the way we use the language to make a swear word than in France. I feel like it's more. It's more standard.
The agglomerating aspect that really kind of came to the fore with the Viz comics back in the 90s, you know what I mean, where you actually have the cock-womble, you're kind of joining the two things. Into a whole string of abuse just all in one word, you know. So it's good, I suppose, at the end, putting the UK and the Anglophones kind of ahead of the French when it comes to swearing. But back to you and being here in Paris, you ask people when you're in the stand-up shows, why are you in France? Why are you in France? So I'm asking you, why are you in France? Why did you choose Paris?
It was for two reasons. One was at the time I used to work for Apple, and I worked in the stores, and they were opening stores in France, and they needed people to move to France that knew how the company worked and that kind of stuff. And I had done that in Australia. I'd moved to Australia when they opened stores there. And I realized the potential professionally to climb up the ladder within that company. And so I thought, as soon as they open in France, I'll do it. So that was kind of my before I'd moved here, before they announced Apple stores in France, I was like, that's like a long goal. Then that happened. And in the meantime, I was in the UK working at Apple while I was at university at that time. And I met a French girl who was from Paris. And I was like, oh, well, that's perfect. Like I will allow myself to kind of
be sucked into
the romance, because if I do move to France at some point, at least she's a link that she's now my wife, and now we have 12 years together. So it was for love and for work.
Money.
And money, it was for money, love, and work.
And I mean, which brings me into the question. I mean, you said you moved here for work, you found love, etc. What about this Netflix phenomenon, Emily in Paris, that has been absolutely slated by the French critics? What's your take on that? The cliched kind of American in Paris, looking through the vacuous kind of rose-coloured Edith Piaf glasses.
Yeah, it's very clearly not made for a French audience or anyone who's been to France and appreciated a bit of time here. It's very clearly made for everyone else it's like a Ratatouille, you know. Yes. But even though for me Ratatouille is even closer to reality, even though it's a cartoon, than Emily in Paris. Like there's some truth to it, there's some exaggerated things, but it's for me, because I spent the beginning part of my career in comedy doing a similar thing but more realistic and more geared towards the French. And you know, when I'm making fun of the French, I'm very careful that it's true. You know, so that I can't be reproached about like, oh, well, if you don't like it, go back to England. You know, French people, when I make fun of certain things, they're like, yeah, you are making fun of us, but you're kind of right, you know?
Well, indeed, it brings me also to a question. I mean, have you ever been accosted after a performance by, I don't know, disgruntled punters who said, I don't like what, your perspective is on France? I mean, you know, the French and of course the language, but I mean, have any members of, like, I don't know, the public or the Académie Française have come up to you to take you up on your interpretation of the subtleties of France and the French?
No, not in real life. Online, yeah, because you know, now that you can complain to people online and reach them directly, specifically, you know, people in whether it's comedians or musicians or actors, you've got access to their Instagram. You could send them a message and they might respond. And you know, you're not writing a letter. So back in the day, probably people would come up to you after a show and go, "Yeah, I don't agree with you on your thing." Nowadays, they just don't.
They vent spleen online because they can hide behind the screen.
So yeah, of course, I get a bunch of people who don't agree with the things I'm saying, or that I'm exaggerating or doing whatever. But you know, I just do what pleases me, and then if there's enough people that like it, then they like it. If not, then
well, you wouldn't be sold out otherwise. I mean, I suppose that's the other thing.
That's the thing. Like, enough people do agree with me.
Yeah.
And most of the people that come and see me are French. So I think they like the English, because they're used to a Hugh Grant image of British people, where it's like, oh, hello, very shy, very awkward.
So British,
and I'm not that. You know, I kind of play that, but I'm also I don't have my tongue in my mouth.
Yes.
What's the French? That was me trying to say a French. I don't hold back. I don't know what the phrase is. J'ai pas ma langue dans ma poche. I don't have my tongue in my pocket. That's the one.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, there's a British person who actually is angry.
And now finding, I mean, you know, the balance as well. I mean, how hard has it been to find the balance for your shows and the performances between English and French? I mean, does it depend? Like, when you enter into the show, you ask for a show of hands. How many people here are English speakers? How many are French speakers? Does it depend on the amount of people who put up their hands on whether you will gravitate more towards French or more towards English in your act?
Not at the very beginning. So when I'm like, yeah, French people make some noise, non-French, that gives me an idea. It's usually about the same. It's usually 90% French, 10% not French. On one or two occasions, it's been more non-French, maybe like 40% non-French and 60 French. The decision comes more while I'm doing an English bit to start with. If I see that the laughs aren't as loud as they normally are, I'm like, okay, that might be because they don't understand what I'm saying. So then I'll do more French, and then I'll be like, yeah, okay, it's because they don't understand English as well as my previous crowd. So it's more during the show that I'll make those.
So it's not a fixed thing. It's a movable feast. Whether you'll go.
Like, I have one English joke. One of the jokes is one that I can tell straight away whether they understand it or not. It's a really stupid joke. It's about the fact that, like, we had a baby with my wife, and she doesn't stop complaining. It's just all day. It's just wah, 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 just complaining all day, and that is just my wife, right? And so when I say that in French, elle pleure toute la journée, elle râle toute la journée, et ça, c'est juste ma femme. Like, when I say that in English, sometimes there's no laugh, because I don't know what's gone on in the mind of the French people. They didn't understand that, like, I was building it up to be my daughter that's complaining all the time, but it's actually my wife. You know, it's like that surprise thing.
Indeed.
So when I do it in English, sometimes that doesn't.
It falls flat.
And I'm like, oh, okay, I need to be more careful about the English. Whereas sometimes they laugh as they do in French, and I'm like, okay, cool, they've got it.
And as a long-time inhabitant of the French capital, I mean, one does find that one loses one's English once you go back home. I mean, you're using all these crazy words that people are looking at you skew-ways, and in fairness, that is something that you nailed pretty much on the head. Let's have a look at this clip about losing my English.
I now am losing my English, and I'm starting to make the same mistakes that French people make when they speak English. What I do now is I take fucking French words, I make them English, and I think that they're English words. But they're not English words. All the time. This show, So British ou Presque, the original title that I had in my head was Rebecoming British. It's a great fucking title. Until I asked my friends in England, I'm like, guys, what do you think about the title Rebecoming British? They're like, Paul, you're a fucking idiot. Because rebecoming is not an English word. Oh. Mais en français, tu deviens et tu redeviens. Bah, you become and you re-become, no? No, Paul, you're an idiot. You become and then you become again. Ah. To become again British is a shit title for a show.
I mean, that's pretty much bang on the money. And I mean, we were discussing this as well with COVID, confinement versus lockdown.
The confinement.
Yeah, the confinement and the deconfinement, which is easing restrictions. Yeah. So, I mean, we say deconfinement in the house, but I mean, we say it to anybody else on the phone back home, they're like, what
are you talking? Yeah, confinement is used. We do have the word confinement, but it's used more for prison. Like, for me, when I think of confinement, it's solitary confinement in prison.
Yeah.
So when my friends in the UK, when I'm saying confinement, they get that it's a word, but that it's not used at all in the same context.
Well, I mean, confinement. My dad, remember, was asking me at the first lockdown. He was saying, "So how are you getting on?" I said, "Well, it's like being in prison with better Wi-Fi." You know what I mean? and access to a kitchen. You know,
probably the Wi-Fi is better in prisons nowadays, isn't it?
Exactly, depending indeed. But now you did touch on, you know, going back to your British friends, you know, how they have seen, you know, your language evolve. But, you know, this kind of the elephant in the room, indeed, is Brexit. I mean, you are half Irish, of course.
Yeah.
Your mum is from Ireland. I mean, are you, is your Irish half being assisted with the bureaucratic runaround where, I mean, British citizens, unless they're married here, they'll have to have a carte de séjour, which is basically a card to live here. So, I mean, do you need that?
No, I don't. I don't know. To be honest, I mean, have you got an Irish passport? Yeah, I've got an Irish passport, so I don't know. But I don't really know how the system works because I came here and the first forms that I would fill out for whatever they were administrative wise were, you know, country of origin, Great Britain.
Yeah. So you don't know if they could come back and bite you on the backside.
Well, if they knock on the door and go, "Where's your carte de séjour?" I guess I'll just show them my. I think we were supposed to have one anyway. That's the thing. When I first moved here, I remember reading books, and they were like, even though European citizens don't technically need a carte de séjour, you should get one anyway. It was all very.
Well, I mean, I remember when I first moved here. It was actually in 2003 where you were actually to go to the prefecture of the police, and if any time you were asked for your carte de séjour, you actually show them a piece of paper that the prefecture would give to you,
right?
And saying you no longer, as an EU citizen, have to, you know, show this. So I mean, we were going around with it in our wallets at the time, just going, haha. Screw you,
right?
You know, you don't need it. But I mean, with Brexit, I mean, how does Brexit feature heavily in your comedy act or in?
No, it's not a huge amount in the comedy, just because I don't think French people really care about it that much.
I mean, has it affected? I mean, your relationship with your French friends or everything? Do people come up to you and say, "Oh, you know, you're a British comedian here in Paris. I mean, what are you going to do after Brexit?" I mean, has that ever been used as a tool against you, if you will?
No, not really. What's weird is I had the impression every time it's in the French news, it comes up quickly. So when we made a decision in 2016, people were talking about it and like, "Oh, le Brexit." Then radio silence until this time last year, almost. Was it this time last year when we left? Yeah. It was in January when it was like, okay, we're leaving. And so that there was a couple of...
It's the end of the transition phase in 2020.
Yeah, there was. I think there was a couple of delays. So every time there was something big that made into French news, it would come up again. But yeah, I don't really get that much... because I think people presume that my French is so good that I'm also a French citizen. Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. I don't have a French passport. But if I wasn't an Irish citizen as well,
you'd need to.
Yeah, I'd just get a French passport. Yes. That would be, and then I haven't renewed. I had a British passport. I haven't renewed it in 5 years.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
I don't see the point.
And indeed, now to finish up our interview here on Paris Perspectives today, one last question: would you class yourself as a Francophile, or do you have a love-hate relationship with the country?
Francophile, that's not only the language, right? It's France in general. Yeah, definitely.
The whole shebang, the whole...
I think like everything, there's always, I mean, it's definitely a love-hate relationship. But in the sense that the hate part isn't really hate. It's
frustration.
It's frustration, and it's also the loving to hate. But yes, for me, it's very similar to a romantic relationship. You know, you love the person, but there's still things that annoy you, like when they brush their teeth. You know, after the 5th year, you can't listen to them brush their teeth anymore. Well, after the 5th year in France, you can't stand the way, I don't know, the TV or the radio, whatever the thing that you want to complain about. But it's the same thing back home. You know, it's never going to be 100% perfect. Yeah. I don't think. And if you think it is, you move to another country and you're like, oh, this is better. The things will come through. You know, people who are like, oh, the northern country, Sweden, they're all amazing. The happiest people on the planet. Oh, I'm going to move there. All right, move there, and we'll see how much you like dark. You know, exactly. Dark days or
having gravid locks all the time.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always compromises, and I think that the easiest thing for people to say when you start complaining about a place is like, oh, if you're not happy, go back to your own country, which is most of the negative comments that I get. And in a way they're right, but I'm like, but you also complain about these things. Exactly. So why am I not allowed to just because I'm not French? You know?
Well, Paul Taylor, thanks for joining me on this, our inaugural edition of Paris Perspectives.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
And best of luck, of course, with getting the show back on the road in January. And, well, to remind you all that Paul is going to be back with So British ou Presque in the new year, and with a one-off show to remind our viewers, our listeners, and everyone on the multi-level platforms that we're going to be broadcasting out on, or podcasting out on. You have the one-off show in Le Grand Rex, which will be here in Paris on the 23rd of April. So, from me, David Coffey, au revoir, à bientôt.
Au revoir.